This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
My pleasure to have with us tonight an old friend, Judge Tom Engel from the Empire State, shall we say, of the North. Tom is from New York City and is here tonight to discuss the forthcoming electoral challenge our country is going through. Tom, welcome.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's always good to be back in Macon and to be with you here on the broadcast.
Well, good. I'll sort of tee our discussion up by saying right now the country is going through a substantial political crisis in a way, where the country is so polarized around two ideals. It's going to play itself out tomorrow in the electoral contest. There are all kinds of different opinions about what should happen, what should not happen. But maybe tonight we could start talking about the two candidates, some of their imperfections. I know their advocates will easily step forward to say how there are many merits on each side, but maybe we could talk a little about some of their imperfections and how they arrived at the summit of our political apparatus. And you're a former prosecutor, are you not, in New York City?
Yes, I am a former federal prosecutor, and indeed the same federal office, the Southern District of New York, which is now investigating the situation that brought us to this most recent email controversy that Mr. Comey has raised and apparently resolved inside of 10 days, at least insofar as Mrs. Clinton's server is concerned. And I'm talking about the Anthony Weiner investigation,
yes.
because that investigation of his sexting, I think it's called, is
that sounds close to right. I think.
It's involving a underage girl in North Carolina. That is being handled by the Southern District of New York, which is a very independent office. It's, of course, within the Department of Justice, but it's a very independent office. And the U.S. attorney there is now a gentleman by the name of Preet Bharara.
Yes.
And one of his predecessors was none other than Mr. Comey himself.
Yes.
So when that investigation turned up these new emails of
Yes.
Mrs. Clinton and her assistant, Ms. Abedin, who's married to Mr. Weiner,
yes.
That required the FBI to go into that new source of emails, which had never been turned over by either Mrs. Clinton or Ms. Abedin. And so I've gotten off on a little bit of a tangent there, but when you just sort of kicked off the broadcast, you were talking about these two competing ideals.
Yes, right, yes.
And I don't think that the candidates represent anything that could ever be close to an ideal of any political polarity. Certainly in Mr. Trump's case, I would not say that he is a conservative.
Yes.
And in Mrs. Clinton's case, it's very difficult to distinguish her props and wares from anyone peddling them in any county fair, much less a political philosophy that could be associated with liberalism, for example, or what is now called, for some reason, progressivism. I think both of these candidates are seriously flawed candidates, and it's difficult to know who to vote for. I have voted, however.
Well, good
Dr.
for you, Tom.
Robinson.
I'm glad to hear, Tom, that
and
you.
I will be here in Macon with the good people of Macon, and tomorrow as well as today. I voted absentee last
Yes,
week.
yes.
And I was on the ballot myself as the local judge, so I voted for myself.
Well, Tom, is that legal? Can you vote for yourself, or is that
well,
out of
I had
something?
I had no choice, Dr. Robinson, because I have no opponent. So
Oh,
I
that's
was
so good. That's a
I
good
was
thing.
required to to do it. This way I do my best work is to run unopposed.
Well, my fingers are crossed for you, Tom. I hope that you will prevail in the hotly contested electoral.
Well, I do. The small town I'm the judge of is a very charming town in the Catskills, and I understand one of the largest, if not the largest, town in area in the whole state of New York. But it's not inhabited by a lot of people, so I like to keep track of them. I've done no advertising, but I think people know me by now.
Well, just a certain magnetic presence goes a long way in these political huskings, I think.
Right.
Well, now, Tom, one of the things that you've had some experience with is the Justice Department, the FBI. There seems to be some ideas, there's estrangement between those two institutions. How would things normally happen with these investigations? So would the district attorney be the person to investigate something like this? How did the FBI get entangled in the whole thing?
Mr. Comey in July came out with an extraordinary statement, not exonerating Mrs. Clinton, but saying that it would be a bad prosecutorial decision to indict her, and that no responsible prosecutor would do so. I think that was a very foolish thing for him to say, quite frankly, because for one thing, he had no business saying it. The way the prosecutorial system works and the way the Department of Justice works is that the FBI does the investigation, and the prosecutors in Washington and otherwise around the country make prosecutorial decisions to either proceed to indictment or not to bring the case. But that decision is made by the prosecutor, not by the FBI, and thus not by Mr. Comey. In Mrs. Clinton's case, it seems perfectly plain to me that the leadership in the executive branch of our government, and this goes straight to the White House and to President Obama and his Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, that a decision was made, however it was communicated, that Mrs. Clinton was not to be indicted, full stop. Thus, Mr. Comey proceeded to be not just prosecutor, but judge and jury as well by effectively closing off any avenue of criminal justice insofar as the server is concerned from Mrs. Clinton. And that just never happens. Under our Constitution, as you, I'm sure, are aware, you can't be prosecuted for a felony unless you're indicted by a grand jury. And no grand jury was impaneled here. A grand jury should have been impaneled, it seems to me, quite clearly, and indeed probably should have been impaneled in the same Southern District of New York, which I've mentioned already, because
Yes.
Mrs. Clinton lives in Chappaqua in Westchester, and that is also located
Yes.
in the Southern District of New York. And had it been located there, there would have been a reasonable chance, it seems to me, to have justice done. Justice obviously was not done, I think. His claim, for example, Mr. Comey's claim in July that she should not have been indicted under Section 796F was preposterous. That's essentially a strict liability statute that imposes criminal liability on anybody working for the government who is as careless as Mrs. Clinton was in not protecting national security secrets and information of the United States. I've seen as long ago as certainly a year, and I think more than a year, that our former Secretary of Defense, under both the Bush and Obama administrations, opined that he thought that her server had been hacked by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. I have no doubt that that was true, and apparently since then further disclosures have indicated that that's the case.
Well, so one can say that routinely there would have been a grand jury impaneled. That would be the routine arrangement. And then you mentioned the arcane statute.
It would not only be routine, it would be constitutional.
It would be mandatory.
Mandatory. Mrs. Clinton's rights would be protected because she could only be indicted by citizens like herself who were members of the grand jury.
Now, I've heard that if a grand jury is impaneled, isn't it axiomatic? They just listen to whatever the prosecutor says. It would be very unusual for a grand jury not to go along with the prosecutor's, opinions, because those are the only opinions that are being presented. Pretty much, I guess. Occasionally, grand juries don't indict, but is that in other words, would it have been fair for Mrs. Clinton to have undergone that, meaning that the next step would have been an indictment and a trial and destruction of her political career? Could she have avoided, assuming a grand jury had been impaneled, could she have avoided a jury trial? How well would her rights be protected?
The destruction of her career did not, has survived thus far in the face of the destruction of all of her handheld devices with hammers and the like.
Yes, right.
So I was talking about one's constitutional right to be indicted. That is a great step forward from Torquemada and the Inquisition.
Yes, right. Yes.
Where you could be put to the torch in an auto
right. Yes, yes.
By the mere word of the Inquisitor.
Yes.
And so a grand jury is
a protection.
It's a protection, and it adds 23 people, and the grand jury systems in terms of their independence and so forth varies a lot from state to state.
Yes.
There's a great deal more intervention, for example, in the grand jury process in the state of New York in their state courts.
Yes.
Than there is in the federal courts. There is in the federal system, the prosecutor has a much more unbridled access, but also a much more unbridled responsibility to present cases, and at least in, so far as I'm aware, in most cases, the federal system works pretty well. I can remember at the end of at the beginning of the Obama administration, there was an indictment of a senator from Alaska and a conviction on evidence that was trumped up, and that was the way in which the Obamacare passed the Senate. I can't remember the senator's name just a second, but it was a complete travesty of justice, and that was brought to you by the Department of Justice under President Obama, a department whose reputation has suffered vastly under both Attorney General Holder and most recently Attorney General Lynch, who entertained Mrs. Clinton's husband, former president, in her airplane in Phoenix just days before Mr. Comey announced his judgment in July. It was a complete travesty.
Well, now, isn't it, I mean, the American people depend on, I guess, the integrity of their judicial system, and aren't most, I guess, people that are in the Justice Department, career people in the FBI, they're career people, they have a substantial amount of integrity, do they not? And, I mean, is this a worrisome thing that the political influence on these two institutions might be increasing and destroying the public's respect for those institutions? Comments? I mean, you've been in the really famous district attorney's office, maybe one of the most famous in New York City, and
well, I mean, it was of grave concern to me, for example, during President Clinton's tenure, that at the end of it, he issued many pardons including to Mark Rich, who was a financier who had been indicted for the largest single tax fraud in the history of the United States, and who then had betaken himself to Switzerland and never was brought to justice. President Clinton accepted $1 million gift from his wife, Denise Rich, and also a $400,000 contribution to his wife's Senate campaign when she was running for Senate in New York, just as his term came to an end. And among the people pardoned were 15 terrorists associated with the FALN, which was the Puerto Rican nationalist group that bombed, among other places, Francis Tavern. And I happen to have been responsible for the prosecution or investigation and prosecution of many of those FALN terrorists in 1977 and 1978. So I was struck dumb by these pardons that were issued to people who had injured and killed many, many people during a terrorist reign all through the 1970s. So it is not as if the Clintons have not tried to pervert the course of justice insofar as the Department of Justice is concerned, or insofar as criminal prosecutions and investigations are concerned.
Well, Tom, I think we've pounded the Clintons around. Just sort of summarizing, certainly the system seems to have some problems the American people, I think, are pretty much aware of. There needs to be some, I guess, corrective action. And one can say that the legitimate liberal ideal that's out there might not be appropriately represented by the present candidate, and we'll just have to see what events unfold tomorrow as to which way the country goes. Now, there's plenty of sin to go around. I think it's pretty ubiquitous. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the defects of candidate Trump, who, as you indicated earlier, may not be the appropriate torchbearer for conservative causes. And I know that you live in New York City and you've encountered Mr. Trump there. And I believe his viewpoints have gone back and forth substantially in different directions. And then additionally, there might be some kind of legal encumbrances that that candidate faces. Do you have any comments about
well,
that?
I think Trump is an appalling figure in many ways, particularly in his vulgarity and lewdness and obvious treatment of women. And it's not just the usual locker room stuff in his case at all. He is a sort of beast-like, but at least he hasn't committed any crimes that I'm aware of, so while he's not my cup of tea at all, I don't think he has seriously undermined the fabric of American democracy the way the Clintons have. Having said that, to be able to vote for him, you'd have to hold your nose. And I'm not here to announce how I voted when I voted by absentee. But it could be that my olfactory senses were stifled.
I see.
And I don't think he's in any serious legal trouble. No, I mean he has a few litigations out there that he lamentably complained about because he was in front of a Mexican-American judge in Indiana, which I thought was absurd. Then I suppose he might have to fend off lawsuits from women who claim they've been assaulted, but it's small beans compared to the Clintons. I note, incidentally, that it appears that the investigation of the Clinton Foundation is continuing, and And that is a very serious matter, it seems to me, and goes right to the racketeering provisions of Title 18. I'm not here to say that Mrs. Clinton should be convicted of those, but the allegations and what we know even from the press of $12 million contributions from the president of Kazakhstan, I think.
Morocco, possibly. I mean, well, whatever.
Well, and then there was Morocco. I mean, it's sort of endless. But as a result of which, a businessman that made a substantial contribution to the Clinton Foundation came into control of 25% or 20% at least of the world's uranium, and that could not have happened without the okay of the State Department, and the Secretary of State, of course, at that time was Hillary Clinton. The Moroccan gift. There are many other examples where the Clintons, instead of going back to their plow, like Cincinnatus, went out and ran what appears to be a racketeering enterprise devoted to bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars and perhaps spending maybe 6%, maybe 8%. I've heard these various figures in order to portray themselves, to portray its venture as a foundation.
Yes.
Or as a charity. That's laughable.
Yes.
And I believe that that's a very serious problem. And I don't know quite how that's going to resolve itself, but it's a very difficult case and will require a lot of time from an FBI that has been compromised and by a Justice Department that has been debased.
Well, that's an interesting word, debase, and maybe it could be applied to the political system a little bit. The coarseness of this electoral cycle is just, I mean, to any observer either here or abroad, it's been quite appalling. Just to go through this, if either of these, assuming one of the two will be elected, we've got our opinions about. We can maybe at the end of the show prognosticate as who we think would be elected. But both are going to possibly encounter some legal difficulties. You've gone through the substantial issue with Hillary Clinton about what may happen in the future if if she is elected. Presumably things will go forward. Although the pardon issue is out there. If you're the president, presumably you could pardon yourself, or President Obama might pardon her just to clear the deck. That is possible.
Yes, that is.
And if Donald Trump were elected president, I'll ask this question. I've heard it said that he's planning on suing for slander and libel the people that have the ladies that have come forward claiming that he's in some ways molested them. Is that going to cause substantial legal trouble? I mean, if he's in the White House, he's suing people. They're countersuing. Is there any criminal liability that may have taken place in these supposed trysts?
Well, these encounters is perhaps a better word. I don't know. I haven't followed that enough to know. I mean, obviously, anytime somebody has made unwelcome advances on somebody else, the possibility of a criminal assault is out there. But I don't, frankly, believe Mr. Trump as in so much in this either. That he would, for example, commence some sort of litigation or seek criminal prosecution of people who have made these claims against him. I think he's just running off at the mouth.
You think so? Well, that's an interesting story. What happens if there's a person that is basically in the White House and then sort of more or less attacks someone for being, shall we say, fat? I mean, yes, a casual person walking down the street. Could that person then sue the president for slander or libel? I mean, if you're
sure.
And so you can have the person in the White House being sued. There's no protection for a sitting president.
Well, I think there is
or is there?
As a practical matter, any civil case would almost certainly be deferred by a trial judge until after the president left office. Yes.
I wonder if that's you know, we encountered that in the past a lot. Well, now, Tom, as we approach the end of our little interchange here, what is it that's going wrong in our political process that we have these two, I would say, I mean, I think we could agree, suboptimal candidates out there? What's happened? I mean, what can we do in the future to improve the process? There are 330 million people here, and how can we do a little better?
You know, I saw an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal last week that said, "Bring back the smoke-filled room."
Yes.
That's not the worst idea I've ever heard. I mean, Clinton, in a way, has her own smoke-filled room by virtue of these super delegates in the
Yes.
Democratic Party, and they, in effect, sort of snatched that nomination away from Mr. Sanders, albeit all during the running of the primaries, whereas the Republicans, who ran a more open primary
Yes.
system, on the other hand, ended up with a candidate whose flaws we have mentioned and detailed only in this broadcast. So I don't know the answer to the question, but I suspect it has to do with having a convention that is a meaningful item of selection, or meaningful means of selection of the candidate. A convention that perhaps follows a long and even difficult series of primaries, but one where the primary voters don't themselves pick up and control the ultimate nomination.
Well, just thinking about, I can remember as a younger boy watching the blurry television. Adlai Stevenson is there against whoever he is. You have the big. There's a lot of tension in the convention site. Which way is Texas going? And they're going back and forth and doing deals, presumably. But I wonder about that process, in that presumably the party regulars could sort of go through and in some ways vet the respective candidates. There'd be some vetting going on about, I mean, it would be, at least they might have some idea about the defects of the people that were being put there, and maybe that would be a better process if one considers the fact that our present system seems to be referable to primaries. There's a huge amount of money there. And there's a pretty restricted voter turnout for the two candidates, the two parties, and that the extremes of each party seem to be able to put their guy or lady across. Maybe we get a more balanced process if we reverted to the older style. I'll submit that as a possibility. Presumably, the Democrats had less of a democratic arrangement, and if the party itself had been, I think we could imagine this, if there had been a regular, quote, fully democratic arrangement, there'd be a good chance that Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee, and it would be, which is a rather extreme viewpoint, but that's what would have happened. And the Republicans, having a far more democratic arrangement, came up with a pretty extreme candidate. I mean, it would make sense to me that this whole issue be re-examined, because democracy and the party system, the two don't necessarily confer, I guess, appropriate righteousness on the process.
Well, the benefits that each party is supposed to confer upon the American people is that they would produce each of them a viable candidate. But we have to remember, as one of our great presidents said, that in reaching important and vital decisions like the election of a president, that decision does not go to the highest bidder. It goes into the hearts and minds of every single American who should bring to it the attention and urgency that he or she conducts in the most important affairs of their lives. And perhaps we have to look at ourselves as citizens even more deeply than we have, and not search out blame here and there.
Well, Tom, thank you for those arcane comments. It's great to have you with us in Macon, and we'll just have to see what the American people decide to do tomorrow. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.